The unseen ring. New moon. Burned to the ground, Arrow is hired to assist the Makai trolls and meets the face he'll never forget. Can he overcome the past, or will he turn against his moral compass for revenge? The swift pitter-patter of his feet hitting the ground with each beat of his heart, he raced towards the cliff edge, quiver strapped to his back, spear and bow in opposing hands. The crackle of 1,000 fires following behind him. Screams of men, women, and children alike rang throughout the forest. He could even hear the mere clash of metal between the defensive and the offensive. His blood boiled. Perhaps the heat of the fire played its part, but his anger seemed to be the main cause of his high body temperature. He was seething. A familiar yowl cried from up ahead, followed by the thud of a body hitting the forest floor. Cat Howler, hurry now, we must join the full moon soldiers in the fight. The deer announced. All the while, Arrow picked up his pace. Once he'd reached the winged, tiger-like creature, he turned back to look upon the burning forest, his gaze slowly following the flames to the ones in the sky. He couldn't help but notice the dragon in the distance. Bony, it seemed. It looked impossible for the thing to be alive, but it clearly was. Arrow, let's go! Her tone became serious. She knew the longer they waited to take action, the more destruction there would be. However, her values seemed to differ from the elves. Levi, you don't see it, do you? He extended his arm and raised his index finger towards the beast in the fog. Who knows how many follow? Our focus should be on the rescues. Dropping his arm in despair, he sighed, looking towards the deer with a sorrowful expression, grabbing the pendant that was strung around his neck. He closed his eyes. As much as we love our home, it is not worth the lives it would take to ultimately lose it in the end. Please, gather your kind. Turn their attention to saving the lives of our people. We will do the same, Nami. Once the name was said, a glittering figure snaked out from behind one of the beautiful jacarandas, shadowed by ash. The figure soon formed into the physical body of a white tiger. Once he'd mounted the celestial creature, the female spoke up as she stepped onto the cliff edge. Don't get yourself killed now, you hear me? Raising his head, he took a moment to sigh before turning back towards the grotto. That is a promise I cannot guarantee to keep. Pushing the feline forward, Arrow Cat Howler took towards his burning home. He wasn't ready to see how many were being cooked alive, how the cluster of trees they once lived in had simply become ash along the ground, painting the grass white. So worried and unprepared, he seemed to have forgotten to watch his surroundings and remember the turmoil of the zone. The male hadn't paid much mind to the fire only growing around him, and the several large clawed footprints they'd crossed. It hit him. Quite literally. He'd been violently thrown by the force of a large tail. Rolling along the grass, scratching up his face, he found himself still, shocked by his growing pain. He'd definitely be bruised tomorrow, if he would have lived past this point. A loud thud from an absurdly large creature sounded beside him with a simple step. Groaning, his familiar retreated into its pendant to protect itself. Straining to push himself up, he planted his hands in the dirt, slowly bringing his knees beneath him as his head turned to see what or whom had thrown him with such incredible force. It was only then that a torch met the left of his face. He screamed out in sheer pain, only losing his strength in response, causing him to completely collapse. Tears welling up in his eyes, he managed to catch the face of the large fanged troll, a dark, teal-skinned male. His hair was red, braided with gold adornments. The expression on his face was one without emotion. Perhaps there was a hint of regret in his blood-red eyes, but from the great distance it seemed to be a mere hallucination due to the heat or the pain, rather than the truth. I'll kill you, Arrow muttered, reaching towards the man, mounted on his large prehistoric beast, who turned away without a care. As his eyes began to close, he could only mutter his threats before his voice faded along with the world around him. The last thing he heard that day was the triumphant roar of the beast he just faced.